In the winter of 2014, in a small town in Vermont, an old man passed away quietly in his home. He was 92 years old. He wore flannel shirts held together by safety pins. He drove a second-hand Toyota Yaris that he'd bought used. He ate breakfast at the same diner almost every day, and he always ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. His name was Ronald Read. And when the lawyers opened his will, they found something that made them check the documents again and again and again. Because this man, this janitor, this gas station attendant, this quiet soul who had never earned more than minimum wage in his entire life had left behind an estate worth $8 million. $8 million. No inheritance, no lottery ticket, no secret business, just a mop, a broom, and a secret that he kept for over 60 years. Today, we're going to tell you exactly how he did it. Not just the numbers, though we'll give you those, but the philosophy, the patience, the quiet discipline that turned pennies into millions. By the end of this video, you'll understand something that most people spend their entire lives never learning. That wealth isn't about how much you earn, it's about how you think. This is the story of Ronald Read, and this is how a janitor became a secret millionaire. To understand Ronald Read, you have to understand where he came from, and more importantly, when. He was born on October 23, 1921, in a place called Dummerston, Vermont. Now, if you've never been to Vermont, imagine this: rolling green hills in summer, blazing orange and red in autumn, and in winter, silence. Deep, heavy silence, broken only by the sound of snow falling on pine trees. Dummerston wasn't a town, really. It was more of an idea, a collection of farms and families scattered across the hills, connected by dirt roads that turned to mud in spring and ice in winter.
Ronald was born into a family that knew nothing of wealth. His parents were farmers, not wealthy landowners, just people who worked the soil with their hands because that's what their parents had done and their parents before them. They raised crops, they raised animals, and they raised children who understood from the very beginning that nothing in this world comes easy. Now, let me paint you a picture of what life cost in 1921, because this matters. A loaf of bread, about 9 cents. A gallon of milk, 60 cents. A modest house, you could buy one for around $6,000, if you had that kind of money, which most people didn't. The average American worker earned about $3,000 a year, and for farming families in rural Vermont, it was often less, much less. There was no social security yet, no safety net, no government programs to catch you if you fell. If you couldn't work, you didn't eat. It was that simple. And here's something important. Ronald Read was 8 years old when the Great Depression began. Think about that for a moment. 8 years old when the world as everyone knew it collapsed, when banks failed overnight, when families lost everything, their homes, their farms, their dignity, through no fault of their own. He watched his neighbors lose their land. He saw proud men standing in bread lines. He felt what it was like to go to bed hungry because there simply wasn't enough. And something happened inside young Ronald during those years. Something changed. He saw what happens when you have nothing saved, when you live paycheck to paycheck, when a single bad year can destroy everything your family spent generations building. And he made a decision, a quiet, internal decision that he never spoke about, but that would shape every choice he made for the rest of his life. He would never be that vulnerable again. Now, here's something remarkable about Ronald Read, something that tells you exactly what kind of person he was.
He was the first person in his entire family to graduate from high school. The school was in the nearby town of Brattleboro, about 4 miles from his home, and his family had no car. So every morning, Ronald would wake up before dawn. He would walk those 4 miles through the Vermont countryside, in summer heat, in autumn rain, in winter snow, just to get an education. And when he was lucky, a passing car would stop and give him a ride. Hitchhiking wasn't dangerous back then. It was just how people got around when they had nothing. 4 miles there, 4 miles back, every single day. Think about the discipline that requires. think about the determination. While other kids complained about small inconveniences, Ronald Read was walking 8 miles a day in all weather just for the chance to learn. He graduated in 1940. And then, like so many young men of his generation, history came calling. World War II changed everything. In 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and suddenly every able-bodied young man in America was needed. Ronald Read enlisted in the United States Army. He was assigned to the North Africa and Italy campaigns, serving in a military repair unit. While other soldiers fought on the front lines, Ronald kept the machines running, the vehicles, the equipment, the infrastructure that an army needs to function. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of thing that gets you medals or mentions in history books, but it was essential. And it taught Ronald something valuable. The most important work is often invisible. The people who keep the world running rarely get the credit. And there is dignity, profound dignity, in doing necessary work well, even if nobody notices. He returned to Vermont in 1945, like millions of other young men, ready to build a life. But unlike many of them, he wasn't dreaming of wealth or glory.
He just wanted something simple: a steady job, a modest life, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing you'll never go hungry again. And so, at the age of 25, Ronald Read took a job at a local gas station in Brattleboro, Vermont. He would work there for the next 25 years. Picture it, 1946. The war is over. America is rebuilding. And in the small town of Brattleboro, Vermont, a young man named Ronald Read shows up for work at a Texaco gas station. In those days, gas station attendants did everything. You didn't pump your own gas. That was considered a premium service. An attendant would fill your tank, check your oil, examine your tires, and wash your windshield, all for the price of a few gallons of fuel. Ronald was perfect for this work. He was quiet, polite, reliable. He showed up on time every time. He never complained. And customers liked him because he never tried to upsell them on things they didn't need. He just did the job. Honest work for honest pay. Now, here's where we need to talk about money. In the 1950s, a gas station attendant made about $40 to $50 per week. That's roughly $2,400 a year. Let me put that in perspective. A new car cost about $1,500. A modest house in Vermont might run you $10,000. A movie ticket was 50 cents. A cup of coffee was a nickel. By modern standards, adjusted for inflation, Ronald was earning the equivalent of about $25,000 a year in today's money. Not poverty, but certainly not wealth. Just enough to get by, if you were careful. And Ronald was very, very careful. He married a woman named Barbara. They didn't have children, but Barbara had 2 children from a previous marriage, and Ronald raised them as his own. He never complained about this. He simply did what needed to be done. They lived modestly. A small house, used furniture, clothes worn until they couldn't be patched anymore.
But here's what nobody knew. Every payday, something interesting happened. Ronald would take his $40 or $50. He would pay the rent, he would pay for food, he would pay for the essentials, electricity, heat, the basics of survival. And then, whatever was left, even if it was just a few dollars, he would do something that almost nobody else in his position did. He would invest it. Now, in the 1950s, investing wasn't like it is today. There were no apps, no online brokers, no index funds that you could buy with a single click. If you wanted to buy stocks, you had to find a broker, you had to pay significant commissions, and most importantly, you had to know what you were doing. Ronald had no financial education. He never took a class in investing. He never had a mentor in the world of money. But he had something else, something that would prove to be far more valuable. He had a library card. Every week, Ronald Read would visit the Brattleboro Library. He would sit in the quiet reading room, surrounded by the smell of old books and furniture polish, and he would read. He read the Wall Street Journal. He read annual reports of companies. He read whatever he could find about investing, about business, about how money really works. He taught himself. Not quickly. There was no rush. He wasn't trying to get rich fast. He was trying to understand, to really deeply understand what makes a good investment. And over months and years of reading, he came to a simple conclusion. The key wasn't finding the next big thing. The key wasn't timing the market. The key wasn't insider knowledge or brilliant predictions. The key was patience. Buy good companies, companies that make products people need, companies that pay dividends, and then hold on to them forever. Let me tell you about his first investment.
We don't know exactly which stock it was. Ronald never talked about these things, but based on what was found in his portfolio after his death, it was likely one of the great American companies of that era. Pacific Gas and Electric, AT&T, General Electric, companies that had been around for decades and would be around for decades more. He would have bought just a few shares at first, maybe $10 worth, maybe $20, the minimum amount the broker would allow. And here's what's crucial. He set those dividends to reinvest. Every quarter, when the company paid out its profits to shareholders, Ronald's shares would automatically buy more shares, which would pay more dividends, which would buy more shares. It was a snowball, a tiny, almost invisible snowball at first. But snowballs, given enough time and enough hill to roll down, become avalanches. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Ronald continued this pattern. He worked at the gas station, he lived modestly, he invested whatever he could spare, and he never sold. Around him, the world was changing. The Korean War came and went. The Civil Rights Movement transformed America. Men walked on the moon. Vietnam divided the nation. But Ronald just kept working, kept saving, kept investing. In 1972, after 25 years at the gas station, Ronald Read made a change. The station was closing, or perhaps he was simply ready for something different. Either way, he took a new job, as a janitor at the local JCPenney department store. Some people might have seen this as a step down, from someone who dealt with customers directly to someone who worked after everyone else went home, pushing a mop through empty aisles. But Ronald didn't see it that way. A job was a job, honest work was honest work, and as long as he had a paycheck, he could keep doing what he'd been doing all along. He worked at JCPenney for 17 years, retiring in 1989.
By then, he was 68 years old. He had worked for nearly half a century in jobs that most people would consider the bottom of the economic ladder. And nobody, not his coworkers, not his neighbors, not even his family, had any idea what he had been building all those years. Now we come to the heart of the matter, the part you've been waiting for. How did a janitor, earning minimum wage his entire life, accumulate $8 million? The answer is not complicated. In fact, that's exactly the point. Ronald Read's strategy was so simple that most people would dismiss it as impossible. It has no secret algorithms, no brilliant trades, no lucky breaks. It has only 4 elements, applied consistently for 60 years. Let's break them down, one by one. Method 1. Extreme frugality. Ronald Read did not live like a poor person who wished he were rich. He lived like a person who genuinely did not care about the appearance of wealth. His clothes came from thrift stores. His car was always used, always practical, never flashy. When a button fell off his shirt, he didn't buy a new shirt. He fixed it with a safety pin. He ate breakfast at the same diner almost every day, a coffee and an English muffin, the cheapest thing on the menu. Now, I want to be clear about something. Ronald was not suffering. He was not denying himself a happy life in order to accumulate money. By all accounts, he was content. He enjoyed simple pleasures, reading, walking, spending time in nature. He found joy in the small things that cost nothing at all. He had simply realized something that most people never understand. Most of what we buy, we don't actually need. It just feels like we need it because everyone around us is buying it too. Ronald was immune to this pressure. He had grown up during the Depression. He had seen what happens when you confuse wants with needs.
So he spent only on needs. And everything else, every single dollar that others would have spent on upgrades, on status symbols, on treating themselves, went into the market. Let me give you some real numbers. If Ronald saved just $100 per month throughout his career, a reasonable estimate given his income and lifestyle, and invested it consistently, that alone would be significant. But combined with the other 3 methods, it became extraordinary. Method 2. Long-term holding. This is perhaps the most important element of Ronald's strategy. He never sold. In the world of investing, this is harder than it sounds. Much, much harder. When the market crashes, and it always does eventually, every instinct screams at you to sell, to get out, to protect what you have. In 1973-74, the market dropped 45%. Ronald didn't sell. In 1987, on Black Monday, the market dropped 22% in a single day. Ronald didn't sell. In 2000, the dot-com bubble burst, and the market fell almost 50%. Ronald was nearly 80 years old. Any reasonable person would have cashed out to protect their retirement. Ronald didn't sell. In 2008, the Great Recession hit, and the market collapsed again. Ronald was 87. He had less than a decade to live, though he didn't know it. He still didn't sell. Why? Because he understood something fundamental about the stock market. It goes down, but it always comes back up. Always. Every single time in American history. And every time you sell during a crash, you lock in your losses. You take a temporary problem and make it permanent. Ronald refused to do that. He simply waited. And every single time, the market recovered, and his portfolio climbed higher than before. Method 3. Dividend reinvestment. This is the engine that powered Ronald's wealth. When you own stock in a company, many companies pay you a portion of their profits every quarter. This is called a dividend.
Most people, when they receive dividends, spend them. It feels like free money, so they treat it like free money. Ronald did something different. He reinvested every single dividend back into the same stocks. Let me show you the math, because this is where it gets astonishing. Let's say you buy $100 worth of a stock that pays a 3% dividend. In year 1, you get $3 in dividends. Not much, right? But if you reinvest that $3, you now own $103 worth of stock. Next year, your dividend is $3.09. Still not impressive, but watch what happens over time. After 10 years, your original $100 has become about $134, even if the stock price doesn't change at all. After 20 years, $180. After 30 years, $243. After 40 years, $326. After 50 years, $438. And this is assuming the stock price stays exactly the same. But stock prices of good companies generally go up over time too, so you're compounding dividends and capital appreciation. Ronald did this for 60 years. Do you see how this works? In the early years, the growth is invisible. You feel like nothing is happening. But in the later years, the growth becomes explosive. The last 10 years of compounding produce more wealth than the first 50 years combined. This is why patience isn't just important, it's everything. Method 4. Stock selection. Ronald didn't buy just any stocks. He was very particular about what he owned. After his death, researchers examined his portfolio. It contained 95 individual stocks, and they had something in common. They were all companies that made things people needed. Not trendy tech companies, not hot IPOs, not speculative bets on the future. Simple, boring companies.
Procter & Gamble. They make soap, toothpaste, laundry detergent. Johnson & Johnson. Band-Aids, baby powder, medicine. J.P. Morgan Chase. Banking. General Electric. Appliances and power. AT&T. Phone service. CVS. Pharmacies. These are companies that people use every single day, in good economies and bad. When there's a recession, people still need to brush their teeth. They still need medicine. They still need to wash their clothes. Ronald invested in the boring necessities of life, and he was rewarded with steady dividends decade after decade. Now let me show you how all 4 methods combine. Imagine Ronald at age 30 in 1951, investing $50 a month. By 1961, at age 40, his portfolio might be worth around $10,000. By 1971, at age 50, perhaps $50,000. By 1981, at age 60, around $200,000. By 1991, at age 70, perhaps $1 million. By 2001, at age 80, around $3 million. And by 2014, at age 92, $8 million. The last 20 years of his life produced more wealth than the first 50 years combined. This is the power of compound interest. This is what Albert Einstein allegedly called the 8th wonder of the world. And it requires only one thing that most people cannot provide: time. Ronald gave his investments something precious. He gave them decades of uninterrupted growth. He never panicked. He never sold.
he never touched the principal. And the market rewarded his patience beyond what anyone, including Ronald himself, could have imagined. On June 2, 2014, Ronald Read passed away at the age of 92. His funeral was a quiet affair. A few neighbors, a few people who remembered him from the diner, from JCPenney, from the gas station decades ago. Nobody came expecting anything unusual. He was just a nice old man who had lived a simple life and died a peaceful death. And then the lawyers opened his will.
The revelation came slowly, as these things do. First, there were the stock certificates, stacks of them, some dating back to the 1950s, companies that had changed names, merged, split, and multiplied over the decades. Then came the brokerage statements, account values that seemed impossible for a man of his means. When the final calculations were complete, the attorney sat in stunned silence. Ronald Read, the gas station attendant, the janitor, the man with the safety pin shirts, had left behind an estate worth $7.9 million. Rounded up, $8 million. But the revelation wasn't finished, because what Ronald Read did with that money, how he chose to distribute it, tells you everything about who he was. He left $6 million to the Brattleboro Memorial Hospital, and he left $2 million to the Brooks Memorial Library. The hospital and the library, the two institutions that care for a community's bodies and minds. Ronald left almost nothing to himself. No monuments, no buildings with his name, no grand gestures. He gave it all back to the community that had given him a place to live, work, and grow for 92 years. When the news broke, the town was shocked. I knew him for years, one neighbor said. I had no idea. He used to come into the diner every morning, a waitress remembered. He always ordered the cheapest thing. I thought he was just, careful. But the more people talked, the more stories emerged. A local handyman recalled that Ronald would sometimes ask him to cut extra firewood. I thought he was just preparing for winter, he said. Now I realize he was being careful with every penny, even at the end. An attorney who had worked with Ronald remembered something interesting. Every time Ronald came in to adjust his investments, which wasn't often, he would pull out a worn piece of paper.
On it were printed the names of all the stocks he owned, with notes in the margins, dividend yields, purchase prices, years held. He kept track of everything, every share, every penny. And yet, for all his attention to his investments, Ronald never lived like a wealthy man. Not because he was pretending to be poor, but because he genuinely didn't want the things that money could buy. He didn't want a big house. He was happy in his small one. He didn't want a fancy car. His Toyota got him where he needed to go. He didn't want expensive clothes. His flannels were comfortable. What he wanted, perhaps, was something else entirely. Security, the knowledge that he would never be vulnerable the way his family had been during the Depression. And purpose, something to build, something to nurture, something to watch grow over the decades. His portfolio wasn't just money. It was a living thing he had created and cared for, like a garden or a child. He watched it grow. He tended to it. He protected it from harm. And in the end, he gave it away. Not to accumulate power, not to build a dynasty, but simply to help. To help people get well at the hospital where he himself had probably been treated. To help children learn at the library where he had taught himself everything he knew. The hospital used Ronald's gift to expand their services, to buy new equipment, to help patients who couldn't otherwise afford care. The library used their share to grow their collection, upgrade their facilities, and provide programs for the community for generations to come. Ronald Read never had children of his own, but in a very real sense, he became a father to an entire community. His money, earned penny by penny, invested patiently year by year, would go on helping people long after he was gone. That is a legacy. That is what it means to be quietly rich. So what can we learn from Ronald Read? What wisdom can we extract from this remarkable life and apply to our own? Let me offer 5 lessons, not just about money, but about life. Lesson 1. You don't have to earn a lot to accumulate a lot. Ronald never made more than minimum wage. Never. Yet he died with more money than most doctors, lawyers, and executives ever accumulate. The secret isn't income. It's the gap between what you earn and what you spend. Ronald kept that gap as wide as possible, and he invested the difference. Lesson 2. Time is more valuable than timing. Ronald didn't try to predict the market.
He didn't buy and sell based on economic forecasts. He simply invested consistently and held on for decades. Every expert who tries to time the market eventually gets it wrong, but the person who simply stays invested through all the ups and downs, they win every time. Lesson 3. Boring is beautiful. There is nothing exciting about toothpaste companies and electric utilities. Nobody brags about owning them at parties. But these boring, unglamorous, essential companies paid Ronald dividends for 60 years. They didn't crash to zero. They didn't get disrupted overnight. They just kept churning out profits year after year, while the exciting investments came and went. Lesson 4. True wealth is invisible. Ronald's labors had no idea he was rich. Neither did his coworkers. Neither did the waitress at the diner. Real wealth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need a fancy car or an expensive watch. It exists quietly, doing its work in the background. The people who look wealthy are often in debt. The people who look ordinary are sometimes millionaires. Lesson 5. What you do with your wealth matters more than how much you have. Ronald could have left his money to distant relatives. He could have created a foundation with his name on it. He could have done 100 things to commemorate himself. Instead, he chose to help, anonymously, quietly, simply. The hospital and the library, healing bodies and nurturing minds.
That choice, that final choice, is what transforms Ronald's story from an interesting financial case study into something genuinely inspiring. Ronald Read's story reminds us that the path to wealth is open to almost anyone. You don't need a high-paying job, you don't need wealthy parents, you don't need special knowledge or unusual abilities. You need only 3 things: patience, discipline, and time. Start now. Even if it's just $10 a month, even if it feels pointless, even if you can't imagine how small investments could ever amount to anything. Remember Ronald at age 30, putting aside $50 a month from his gas station paycheck. He couldn't imagine $8 million either, but he started anyway, and he kept going for 60 years. You have time. Maybe not 60 years, but you have today. And today is when compound interest begins. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think differently about money, about patience, about what it means to be truly wealthy, then I invite you to subscribe to The Quiet Rich. This is what we do here. We tell stories of quiet wealth, not flashy billionaires, but ordinary people who achieved extraordinary things through simple, timeless principles. Click subscribe, join us, and start your own journey to becoming quietly rich. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? What country? What city? What small town? And here's a question for those who remember. Do you recall what prices were like in your parents' or grandparents' era? A loaf of bread for 9 cents? A cup of coffee for a nickel? Let us know in the comments below. Share your memories. Connect with others who understand that the old ways of saving and patience still work today. Thank you for spending this time with us. Thank you for honoring Ronald Read's story with your attention. And remember, the quiet path to wealth is still open. You just have to start walking.